As a farmer traveling to town to sell your crops for the second time this season, you feel the acid burning in your gut. The village, in the shadow of the Carpathian Mountains, clears out early, well before the sun goes down. And last time you were here, well, you try to forget what happened last time. The illness took weeks to recover from. You glance up at the sky. A full, bright moon is watching you from behind a veil of clouds. You hurry and pack up your remaining turnips and carrots, shoving everything haphazardly into the handcart. Getting to the safety of the inn is paramount. All around you, the darkness swallows everything, and shadows grow bolder as the western horizon gives up its battle with the night. The small room in the inn is cold, and a chill wind forces itself through the cracked window's small gap, hitting you right in the face. Bundling up, you roll away from the window and pray for sleep. Your dreams are troubled. A figure is standing in the room, lurking over you, looking down with red eyes and sharp teeth. It moves in, closer. Soon the figure has tilted your head, and you sleep through a sharp pressure on your neck. The dream fades as everything goes black. The next morning you oversleep, and when you finally pull yourself out of bed, your worst fears are realized. You've contracted whatever disease you had last time. The one that left you lightheaded, dizzy, and fatigued. You feel cold. The mirror in the main tavern reveals your pallor. Your heart beats rapidly, and the skin on your neck is broken with two sores. The villagers give you a wide berth, refusing to talk to you. You remember that from the last time as well. No longer welcome, you drop a coin onto the counter since the innkeeper won't even touch it, and dread pushing what will feel like an impossible heavy handcart all the way back to your quiet, humble farm. As you wheel the cart out of the village, you hear murmuring behind your back. "Poor fool," a man says. "That farmer was chosen," a woman replies sadly, "and hopefully lives far enough away to avoid pursuit." Pursued by what, you think to yourself. You stop to rest multiple times on the way back to your farm, and for reasons you can't quite articulate, you feel as if you're not returning alone. Not this time. Stories of creatures that stalk humanity at night stretch back to the earliest civilizations. They have gone by many names, but their tendencies are surprisingly consistent, even if the details change from culture to culture and century to century. Which got me thinking, what if vampires were not undead cursed humans at all? What if they were a surviving hominin with traits and evolutionary adaptations that allow them to prey on our species? Welcome to Paranormal Possibilities, where we talk about what is possible, what is probable, and what is unlikely. Today we're launching into a mental exercise of speculative evolutionary biology as we try to understand how a species could evolve beside us as it preys upon us and that matches the vampire of legend and folklore. I will consider the past and current folkloric attributes of what we call vampires, consider how such attributes might have evolved, and how we, as their prey, would have evolved countermeasures in the age-old evolutionary arms race between predator and prey. For the purpose of this exercise, I'm going to call this species Homo vampiris. A useful way to explore this question is through evolutionary constraints. Rather than asking what adaptations a creature would need, we can ask which heritable traits would have been favored by natural selection over thousands of generations to produce such a creature. I will also look briefly at vampires in fiction, which is the modern equivalent of vampires in folklore, to see if any of the stories might be subconscious warnings, reminders that our mortal enemy in the hominin world is still out there feeding on us. The first creatures in history that might be a match for our extant species of predatory hominin comes from Mesopotamia in the form of two demons named Lalitu and Lamashtu. These demons were said to attack people while they slept, preyed on pregnant women and infants, and were associated with the night. Later we have Clean Lamia of Greece, who preyed on children, seduced young men, and consumed blood or flesh in later versions. And Impusa, another creature of the night. Ancient Rome carried the Greek folklore forward, with more night creatures attacking the young and vulnerable. It should be noted that none of these creatures are considered undead. This will be important as we look at Homo vampiris. Around 1000 AD, the first real vampires began to appear in legend and lore. These were restless corpses, revenants, and the dead returning to torment the living. In the 1190s, we get written accounts from William of Newburgh claiming these creatures wander at night, spread disease, and attack the living. Similar stories appear in many cultures, and vampires and other undead creatures have many names: Varkalak, Draugr, Upir, Vampir, Vrykalakas, Strigoi, Nosferatu. But the birth of the modern concept of the vampire stems from the vampire panic of the 1700s. Governments investigated alleged vampire cases, corpses were exhumed, and as they lacked a modern understanding of decomposition effects, they interpreted bloating, blood around the mouth, and hair and nails that appeared to grow longer as proof the corpse had been feeding. The vampires make the jump from folklore to literature. John Polidori's 1819 novel The Vampire, the 1872 novel Carmilla, and Stoker's well-known 1897 effort Dracula all coalesce our modern concept of what a vampire is. While there have been hundreds or thousands of novels and films on the topic, each with their own subtle spin on the creature in question, they all present a consistent array of abilities and weaknesses. This is where we pick up the trail of our elusive and hypothetical hominin cousin, Homo vampiris. Notice how the folklore evolved over the centuries. First, supernatural demons, then restless human dead, then blood-drinking revenants, then finally intelligent predators. Then look at Homo vampiris through a lens of each culture trying to make sense of them. If a lineage such as Homo vampiris existed, its human-like appearance might suggest a relatively recent common ancestor, perhaps on the order of tens of thousands rather than hundreds of thousands of years. They would share our ecosystems with the other hominins that lasted until fairly recently, including Homo neanderthalensis, Denisovans, and Homo erectus. And as Homo vampiris evolved to prey on us, they would have evolved certain traits that our folklore would misinterpret. In this exercise, we can assume a few things. First, Homo vampiris is long-lived. While the average human might live 70 years or more, we might see a vampire that hasn't aged much at all in the years they have been known to us. From our perspective, they are immortal or undead. Yet they just age slower than we do. Maybe they live to 120, or 220, or 500. While the fossil record cannot tell us how long an undiscovered hominin lineage might have lived, evolutionary biology does not rule out the possibility of a species with a substantially longer adult lifespan than our own. Second, Homo vampiris, being a different species and a predator, might have evolved into a nocturnal predator. This would solve several problems. Humans are most vulnerable at night. Vampires, looking similar to humans but not quite right, more on this in a minute, could use the darkness to shroud their true identity. From a distance, at night, they look just like another villager. Being nocturnal has challenges, though. They'd need to evolve night vision of some sort. They'd be pale. Their skin might be translucent, revealing veins and arteries below. Their eyes might appear red or pink and might be enlarged to maximize low-light intake. This could account for the folkloric ability of a hypnotic gaze, since eyes that were 10% larger might appear quite unsettling. In fact, their appearance might be cadaver-like. Third, blood is a portion of their diet. This is a precedent in mammals already. The vampire bat, which was named for the creature of legend and not the other way around, is a sanguivore, meaning their diet is 100% blood. The biological adaptations for such a singular food source shows up in their morphology, allowing them to survive on something that most could not. Any novel adaptation requires selective pressure, though. One explanation could be prolonged resource stress combined with niche specialization. A small, isolated population facing intense competition for conventional food sources may have gained an advantage while exploiting an overlooked resource, fresh blood in this case, much as vampire bats later evolved to do. Perhaps Homo vampiris evolved in a similar way, though at their size and mass, blood would probably function more like a nutritional supplement than a complete diet. The saliva of a vampire could evolve with a numbing agent, similar to vampire bats, leeches, mosquitoes, and nearly every other bloodsucker alive today. The vampire might also develop two fang-like teeth. The canines, or lateral incisors if you're a Lost Boys fan, would make the most sense biologically, since many animals evolve canines into piercing teeth. And they wouldn't need to puncture huge holes, just enough to break the skin and get the blood flowing. An intelligent hominin might also discover that killing prey immediately is not always the most efficient strategy. If repeated access to the same individual are possible, the long-term caloric return could exceed that of a single fatal attack. Natural selection would favor individuals who more closely resembled humans despite being another species, because the most successful vampires would be the ones who can blend in the best with human groups. Any predator that can approach prey without being recognized enjoys an enormous survival advantage. Natural selection would therefore favor individuals who looked progressively more and more human generation after generation. They might be a slimmer species where energy economy is paramount. If blood served as their primary food source, it would provide abundant water and nutrients, but relatively few calories compared to fat-rich meat. Natural selection might therefore favor a leaner body requiring fewer calories to maintain. If so, they could appear to human eyes as gaunt and wiry. If Homo vampiris possessed a spoken language of their own, individuals capable of learning local human languages would likely have enjoyed a considerable survival advantage. Their speech might have carried an unusual accent, but the ability to communicate could help them pass unnoticed among human populations. They could have evolved to become quite adept at blending in, though the cultural nuance and specificity in every human society would probably be out of their reach, unless, of course, they stayed close enough to develop alongside humans in terms of use of fire, the atlatl, the wheel, and so on. Like many apex predators, they would likely exist at relatively low population densities. Large predators require abundant prey, naturally limiting how many individuals an environment can support. That low population density would also help explain why, if such a species existed today, encounters would be extraordinarily uncommon. With all these evolutionary adaptations, Homo vampiris would be somewhat successful. Like most predators in the wild, maybe their success feeding rate would be around 30 to 50%. The failed attempts could lead to fleeing the scene, being hunted or killed, or having to leave the area completely. There are impossible traits to consider, but there are likely logical explanations for all of them. Homo vampiris would be unable to turn into a bat or bats, for example. That's not a feature that nature could spool up. And remember, for this exercise, we're assuming this is a natural rather than supernatural creature. It is possible a vampire was caught in the act of trying to feed on a human, had to flee, was chased by villagers, and retreated into a nearby cave it called home since it couldn't live in the human village without being discovered. The villagers then track it to the cave. They attempt to go inside. Bats, also living in the cave, are startled by the torches and loud shouting and take flight over the heads of the mob. And then somebody in the mob exclaims, "The vampire turned into a swarm of bats." And dismayed, the whole mob returns to the village. The myth of being undead is simply a combination of being long-lived and pale and gaunt in appearance due to the lack of sun. Sunlight which wouldn't kill a vampire, but its eyes would be sensitive to the bright light, and it would sunburn easily. Which leads me to the next point, human countermeasures. Humans would have evolved alongside the predatory Homo vampiris. So how would Homo sapiens have evolved? For starters, they would have evolved a negative reaction to anything that looks human but isn't quite human. It might be a visceral reaction, one of dread or panic, or just an unsettling wariness you can't explain. We have a term for this coined by Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori. He calls it the uncanny valley. Anything that is just human enough but doesn't quite convince us repulses us for reasons we can't explain. Robots, mannequins, and 3D characters can all sometimes land in the uncanny valley. Why would we need such a universal reaction? If Homo vampiris really did exist and walk among us, being afraid of not humans in our midst would be a viable and valuable survival trait. Second, we would also evolve a high level of social intelligence. We would be excellent at recognizing familiar faces and voices, emotional expressions, deceptive behavior, whether or not someone appears ill or off. All of these could evolve for other various reasons, but the presence of a near human-like predator would make these abilities relevant and critical. Third is the folklore itself. Once Homo sapiens developed sophisticated language and symbolic expression, we began passing knowledge from one generation to the next. This likely included spoken stories, dramatic reenactments, cave paintings, and other forms of symbolic art. Some of the oldest surviving examples date back tens of thousands of years, and many stories were designed to protect us, to pass on what we had learned from one generation to the next. Things like, be aware of that species of big cat, it can be a man-eater. Watch out for that plant with the red stems, it makes us itch. And of course, watch out for the creatures of the night that suck our blood. Lastly, humans also formed alliance with another predator. Dogs hear better than we do. Their sense of smell is superior to ours. They detect movement and darkness better than we do. If another nocturnal hominin stalked human settlements, there might have been no better alarm system than man's best friend. If Homo vampiris existed as we've mapped it out in this thought experience, then such a species, specialized in nocturnal predation on humans, would contribute to the selective pressure that led to the traits we have today, just as it would shape what vampires would look like and how they would behave. If such a species had been part of our food chain, or more accurately, we were part of theirs, then our stories throughout all of history would declare them dangerous, even if the stories themselves evolved beyond what we were actually dealing with. Even something as mundane compared to an undead night stalker as an extant hominin surviving to this day pales in comparison to the stories we create about them. In other words, if vampires were another branch of humanity, then perhaps our oldest monster stories aren't about the supernatural at all, but about another intelligent predator we never quite forgot. So now it is your turn. Tell me in the comments whether you think vampire folklore might have been based on a hominin species that lived beside us in prehistory, either a species like the one I've described in this video, or just another species like Homo erectus. Please like and subscribe if this video was of interest. My channel is still evolving on YouTube, and I'm looking forward to growing it with you. And remember, the possibilities are endless.